strengthened reader, someone who's basically autonomous. He doesn't need to rely upon the whole community all the time for handouts, and he's very weak. He becomes dependent on Allah. We'll get into detail. So let's look at this list. Obviously, this list, brothers, it can be updated. The brother one was about right? We will talk about it as well. It comes on, of course, the situation where a Muslim lady is married to a Muslim man, say they were Christians before they were married. Now she reverts. What's the situation? How do you deal with it? This is very kind of situation. So, my friends, the Muslim now don't know about it. Yeah? We're all Christians. We all, as a good Catholic, you turned your back on us. All this sort of stuff. Forced to leave the home or to hide faith. There used to be a Sikh guy. He was and what he did was go in his car, get a Sikh clothing, leave the Sikh clothing, drive to the mosque, go back in the car, read the turban and read the Sikh clothing, and go. The chain was in the car. He hid his identity for like a long while, and he hid from his family. Some of these, they will literally kill you. And we know, what I know, at least one Sikh is secret from his family. If they find out you're Muslim, this is taboo, you've done the worst thing possible, we're going to not just disown you, we'll try to murder you. It's a threat. Some of them, that's a real threat. Some of them, one sister with car, or leave the work now. Remember, but they won't know nuances of something that's been for a number of years. They won't know, okay, I should write an email to my boss, I should look at the law, what the law says. Because the law says they have to allow you to practice your religion, yeah, and allow you to pray at work and stuff like that. Whether they give you a proper prayer room or just use like a meeting room or something like that, that's a different thing, right? Debt finance, we talked about that one. The brother used to gamble, or he's got this financial burden, all this sort of financial difficulty, victims of abuse. This is very tricky. This is something that we can't necessarily deal with as well. This is something that you need professional help with, yeah? People that have been abused in different ways, it can affect them in many different ways, and you need to give professional counselling and refer them to the professionals for this sort of problem that they might be facing. Legal troubles they can't afford, some kind of divorce they're going through or situation, other kind of legal things that are going on, immigration, whatever it is, there's these complexities as well. Developing doubts about Islam and you don't know who to ask. The Muslims you have asked either don't know themselves or don't give unsatisfactory answers. Very little knowledge about Islam beyond the basics. So they know there's Allah, they know there's a heaven and hell, and that's all they know. And that's all they know for the next 20 years. This is common amongst you guys. For the next 5 years, they don't pray 5 times a day. They're still they've become Dawood from David. They're Dawood. They don't pray 5 times a day. They know absolutely zero knowledge or very little knowledge beyond what they first learned within the first few days. They still affiliate to Islam. They say they're a Muslim, but they do not go beyond the basics. Very little knowledge. No practicing, no Ramadan, no fasting, no 5 pillars. Where are they at? They're at the same place they were 5 or 10 years ago. And that's number 9, they're not practicing the basic obligations of Islam. Not receiving enough help from the local Muslim community. We mentioned this one, that the Muslims that come out in the beginning, they don't tell them about things where they can be assisted or helped. Loneliness, our brother here, he mentioned about this, or our brother here, I can't remember where it was, he mentioned about this alienation and stuff like that. Loneliness is a really big problem in this country. Does anyone know how many people, so the population of the UK is about 65 million. Does anyone know how many people suffer from loneliness? It's recorded through a charity, a statistic. And these are the ones that have possibly admitted it, said, I suffer from loneliness, right? It's a high number. Can anyone guess the number? 60%. That's, I'm trying to work out the percentage. It's not that high, I don't think. No, it's not that high, because that would be a big number. It's not, say in the millions, how many, 65 million, how many do you think? A little bit less, or a bit less?
12.
Yeah, but it's 11. 11 million suffer from loneliness. And it's not the old age loneliness that you might think, okay, loneliness is the guy, Peter, he was married for so long, his wife passed away a year ago, he's on his own now. So he's 65, 70, he's lonely, he's on his own in his house, he lost his wife, yeah? That's what we would imagine loneliness to be very common. But now, the biggest group of lonely people are the 16 to 24-year-olds. They've got Facebook, they've got internet, they've got Twitter, they're on the social media. Their social interactions are going like that, they're going down, and this new are really isolated and lonely. They're really cut off from friends and real, true friends and company and old-fashioned good things that take away this loneliness and stuff like that. Russell Brand, he did his research and he affirmed that number of 16 to 24-year-olds. His research said that primary group of lonely people in the UK is the youth now getting lonely. Identity crisis, and we mentioned it with the kind of the Sikh guy. He changes out of his clothing, he disappears, comes back, he hides his identity. It's a crisis. Am I Muslim at home? Am I Muslim outside? Muslim at work? Where? Confusing. And there's probably loads more problems, guys. And we mentioned the brother mentioned the marriage one. This is a very intimate and very kind of a sensitive area where reverts get problems as well. Finding a wife, for example, that becomes an issue. You know, anything, right? So, have you ever wished to live at the time of Prophet Muhammad and be among the companions? That ever been a wish that you may have had? Anyone?
Yes.
Yes, excellent, brother. Right. So you said, you know, obviously Islam was being revealed, pristine religion was there, pristine Islam, Sahaba was there. It was the best time, wasn't it? Basically, it's the best time, right? So there's a verse of the Quran, chapter 39, verse 9. They love those who emigrated to them and find not anyone their breasts of what the emigrants were given, but give them preference over themselves, even though they are in poverty. So remember, a lot of the Sahaba were in extreme poverty, dire poverty. And whoever is protected from the stinginess of his soul, it is those who will be the successful. So this story here, this is like relating to a story where one of the Sahaba, he himself was very poor, he's in poverty. Yet the Riva, or the other Sahaba who he invited over for dinner, himself was poor as well. So what the host did, he had enough food for himself and the guests. So he gave all the food to the guests, he put pots in front, the plate and the utensils, he pretended to eat the food, he turned down the candle, made the place dark, made it a meeting as a host, but he gave all the food to this guest. That's how they looked after these new Muslims. They put everything for them forward. It wasn't like they didn't know them, they brought them in their houses, they looked after them, they made them feel loved, protected, and happy in their coming to Islam, right? And what was the common factor with all the Sahaba? There's a common element amongst all of them. It doesn't apply to Prophet Muhammad, but it's common amongst all the Sahaba. What's one thing that's common?
Self-sacrifice.
Excellent, excellent. Self-sacrifice, and that's what they did. Remember, the man himself didn't have food, but he gave to the other Sahaba the food. Why did he do it? Because he understood the importance of looking after this person, this new Muslim. He understood the critical importance. In fact, all the Sahaba understood this. That's why if you look around where they died, where did they die? They died in the Prophet's mosque area, in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, in the peninsula. They spread around. They went around the globe. They went and carried the message, right? And they knew the importance of Dawah. So what you could say was also common. All the Sahaba had one thing in common, different from Prophet Muhammad. It's very relevant to the course. Good, excellent, brother. They were all reverts, weren't they? All the Sahaba were coming to Islam. Each and every single one came as a revert, right? So this is something you want to bear in mind. This is how their relationship was with reverts. They made sure that they looked after them. They knew that this is the future there. As the revert comes to Islam, this is the future of Islam, basically. So, where are the new Muslims now? So, this is very difficult to quantify. There's not some sort of grand count. Okay, this guy converted in Coventry on this date and that date, and we've got a track record, a giant register of all the reverts. No one
That being said, I don't want that to be a deterring factor for anyone. Because the reality is, alhamdulillah, Allah has given us a way of life which is very simple, right? And to convey its message is very simple. Unfortunately, what we see a lot online, on YouTube, we see a lot of philosophical discussions, debates, the conveyance of certain arguments, rational arguments, etc. Now there's a place and space for that, right? And we will cover some of that stuff, but you shouldn't see that as the norm, right? There is a certain sphere where that stuff works. But when you speak about giving dawah to the masses, majority of the general population, that's not relevant, right? At the end of the day, what works for human beings? What do we go by? We go by what makes sense to us and what we relate with. And in most cases, those are very simple things, right? Now we'll clarify this as we go along as well, inshallah, in the course. So we've done that. We don't need to cover that, inshallah. Okay, so what is dawah? What does dawah to mean to you? Yes.
Not being a salesman and, you know, not even actually having the aim of, let's say, trying to convert him, but convey the message.
Okay, so to convey the message. Okay, what does the word da'wah mean to you?
Calling to Islam.
Calling to Islam? Okay, good. Anything else?
Clearing doubts about Islam. That's some.
Clearing doubts about Islam. Okay.
I like calling to Allah. I think it's more powerful than saying Islam. Ultimately, that's
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah. Anything else?
It's not just calling as well, it's like your character as well, how you present yourself.
So that's a very powerful element too, right? That we have to consider not only the call, which is the physical call through speech, but also how it's backed up through your characteristics, etc. Now, obviously, the word comes from the root, which means to call and to invite. Right? And from the Islamic context, we're saying to call and to invite to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to His worship. That's essentially what we're reminding people of. Right? Now, one thing I want to do right now is I want to plant a seed, and we're going to develop this as we go along. And what I want you to think about is, we know the word da'wah has made it over into other languages too. Right? Now, can someone who speaks Urdu? Bengali?
Dawah.
Yeah. So we have Dawah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even Bengali. I was surprised when Johnny is here with us as well. He speaks Bengali. He told me Dawah is also a part of using Bengali. But what does that word mean in our languages?
biryani.
That's probably the best way. That's the best tafsir you're going to hear on that word itself, biryani, basically, right? One word. But that's what. So when we say dawat, we're inviting someone to a meal. But let me ask you another question. If I was to say, what's the difference between inviting someone to a meal and inviting someone to a dawat? Like, if you were to distinguish these two things, what are the nuances? What's the slight difference between the two things? So a meal and a dawat. What would you say?
There's more discussion in a dawah, isn't it?
Okay, so there's more to it. There's more discussion. What else?
More people.
More people.
There's a reason.
Okay, there's maybe a bigger reason behind it. Yeah. What else?
The potential might not be food there.
Sorry, there.
So the potential might not be food there if you're going to a dawah.
Okay. Yeah. True.
We would have
Depending
gone.
where you're from.
If that was the case, no one would go. Yeah. But if you think about a dawat, it's a bit more lavish. It's a bit more grand. There's more to it. It's not just a meal, but it's more of a banquet. It's a gathering. There's more stuff going on, right? Now, if you were to invite someone to a dawat and you genuinely want them to come, brothers, yeah, to your house, you know, because sometimes there's that type of invitation where you make it, but you don't want them to come. If you genuinely want someone to come to your house, how would you do it?
Sincerity.
You'd be sincere, right? So what would that mean? How would that translate into your character? How would you behave? What would you do?
Welcoming.
You'd be welcoming, okay. How would you be welcoming?
You physically go and connect with them. You're going to be a WhatsApp or.
Yeah, so you actually make the effort to go and see them in person and speak to them. When you see them, how would you behave? What would you say?
Humble.
You'll be humble? Okay, what else?
Happy.
Happy? Okay, what else? Yeah, good. You'll be happy. You'll be smiling, right? What else?
You make them excited to come as well.
Yeah, so you have this excitement that you want that to translate over to them. You want to get them all excited about the holiday. Good. What else?
Give them the reasons why you want them to come.
Yeah, you'll give them reasons, right? You'll try to explain to them why this is going to be an amazing day or an amazing evening. What else?
Trying to beg them that they come again, you know.
Yeah, so you're going to be
welcoming.
Exactly. So your characteristics, everything about your approach is going to be so amazing that you're going to not only want them to come now, but again and again and again, right? Now, I want you to compare this, juxtapose this, compare this to calling to Allah. Okay? When we call someone to a meal, to a house, and we genuinely want them to come, we put so much effort. Some people may even print cards, right? Some people may even do a reminder a day before, right? Calls, etc. Right? You may even share a menu, yeah. But that's calling to a worldly meal. Now compare that to calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If that's how we carry ourselves, conduct ourselves, the effort that we put in calling someone to a worldly meal, then how should we be calling to Allah? How should our characteristics be? How should we carry ourselves? What should our mannerisms be? How much effort should we make? Right? And I'm planting the seed now. We're going to develop this as we go along, but it's very important to consider this because a lot of problems that we see in the dawah today, and there's a lot of dawah going on, Yeah, who's seen YouTube videos of Dawah conversations? Many of us, yeah? Who's seen Speakers Corner videos? Many of us. Who's been Speakers Corner? SubhanAllah. Yeah, so we've actually travelled down probably to go there. Yeah? Now, when you see those videos, if we're being very honest, generally speaking, what are we seeing? What's the characteristics?
Jungle.
Yeah, it's a jungle. What else? We see argumentation. Yeah? It's almost like, I want to win this debate. You know, it's about overpowering people. Yeah? Just think about that. You're calling to Allah, but look at the characteristics that are coming across the video. Yeah? And don't only think about the damage that's been done in that moment. Think about the damage that's been done to the people that are watching this online. Right? Hundreds of thousands of people watch these videos globally. Imagine non-Muslims that are looking into the purpose of life and they're coming across these videos. What are they going to think? I don't want to be a part of what these guys are following. It just makes them arrogant and full of themselves. Yeah? So that's a big problem, because that's a general perception that's emerging about the Dawah. You know? And non-Muslims are also aware of this, that there's Muslims that are conveying their way of life. They're sharing their way of life. But when they're seeing the way they're doing it, this is what they see generally. So we have to really consider this. And what we need to keep in mind, brothers, is that if we're considering getting involved in sharing the message of Islam and getting involved in the work of Dawah, it's not a joke. Wallahi, it's not a joke. I've seen brothers over the years who've been involved, they've become popular, they've done Dawah, they've been really good, and within months they have completely fallen off track and they've even left the belief. I've heard stories, right? It's not a joke. Yes, it's literally not a joke. What you're doing, it's a very heavy task. It's a very heavy task that the Prophets of Allah will prepare for, right? And they had to go through training themselves before they actually got up and stood up and then went and conveyed the message. And they realized, they discovered the hardships. And these were the Prophets of Allah. So imagine us, yeah? But we take it as a joke these days. Anyone to get up and go and do whatever and it's fine. So we need to keep this in mind, inshallah. Now obviously there are some ayat of the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly encourages us to get involved in calling to His way. Many places in the Quran, right? Where Allah says, call to the way of your Lord. It's a direct command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And sometimes we don't have to go to certain verses which we may not come across regularly. If you even go to certain chapters of the Quran, certain surahs which we have memorized. Surah Ikhlas, who memorized Surah Ikhlas? How does it start? What's the very first word? What is kul? Say. Share, tell them. Convey to them. Right? What? That Allah is uniquely one. So the encouragement to call and share this message is present in the Quran, throughout the Quran. Allah tells us over and over again to share this message and call to His way. Now this should be a very motivational factor for all of us anyway. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our creator, is telling us to share the message. Not just live Islam for ourselves and benefit for ourselves, but to share it with others too. Another very key principle, important principle to keep in mind when it comes to the Dawah, is our duty to convey the message, not to ensure that someone becomes Muslim. Okay? Sometimes some of us get hung up on this. We get caught up on this and we think, my job is I need to speak to Steve or Bob and he has to listen to me and I have to make sure that he becomes Muslim. Right? That's not your role. You shouldn't be concerned with who becomes Muslim or not. All we have to be worried about is, are we making enough sincere effort and delivering the message to the best of our ability so this person understands what we're saying and that's clear for them so that they can make a well-informed decision. That's what we have to be concerned about. We shouldn't be worried about, okay, Bob, has to not take the shahada? If he isn't, why isn't he? Bob, you have to, before you leave. You know, without too many, we almost pressure people into this situation sometimes. Right? And it's unfortunate, because wallahi, I was speaking to a brother in London, Green Lane Mosque, Islamwise. They're an amazing organization to take care of new Muslims. I had a meeting with a brother yesterday, on Thursday, and he told me some horror stories. Because he's in touch with loads of Dawah teams locally. And he says they send reverts over to me, and the reverts come in, and I'm teaching them how to make salah. Now imagine the situation, because Islamwise's objective is what? Taking care of new Muslims and developing. They are not there to do the Dawah, they're there to fulfill that niche, right? So they're expecting that the Dawah teams that are sending new Muslims over to them are doing their job properly, right? But what's happening is people are coming in, and he's teaching them how to pray, and as soon as, for example, they're going into ruku, they're saying, oh Jesus Christ, help me. Yeah? And stuff like this. And he's thinking, well, what's going on there? Didn't the guys tell you at the table that we believe in Jesus but he was a prophet? He's like, what? And he's shocked. And it's a true story. He said this guy, I told him, he was shocked and he left. Right? So it's a big responsibility, and we have to make sure that we're conveying the message clearly to people. Right? Not just forcing people to become Muslim, even if they go, this is how some of the missionaries would do things. Right? And they will change their strategies and their message, etc., just to make sure people convert. We don't have to follow them. We shouldn't follow the same way. Right? We're not supposed to lie as Muslims. We have to be honest in our approach. And if that means someone says, I need more time, I want to go away and think about it, alhamdulillah, give them the time, give them the space. Yeah? Be holistic in your da'wah, especially in the times we live in, a very, very important principle too. Now we know giving da'wah means what? Is to convey the message through speech. Right? However, we have to make sure that we back this up with our actions too, especially in the times that we live in. Now there's a very beautiful verse in the Quran, chapter 41, verse 33, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions three things, or He gives us an insight into three things, and He gets us to think about three things. Number one, Allah says, and who is better in speech? Right? Now the Arabic, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا, and then as it continues, from a structural grammatical perspective, what's going on here in the Arabic? What is Allah saying? How would you translate this first part here? وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ. And who is better in speech? So what is this? Is this a statement or is this a question? It's a question, right? It's a rhetorical question. Now, who could tell me why, especially in classical Arabic, in particular in the Quran, does Allah use rhetorical questions? What's the purpose? Revelation. Okay. So developing that, let's think about this now. If, for example, you're speaking to John on the high street, and John turns around and says, you tell John, John, God is the most loving, and God wants best for you, for example. Yeah? God is the most merciful. John says, oh, that's very interesting. That's nice to know that God is the most merciful. You know what? My mom is also merciful. It's nice to know that there's something common that my mom and God share. Is that correct? No, right? This is shirk, essentially, right? So what's he doing here? What's going on?
Like Allah, the attributes, Allah like perfect in the attributes, whereas like us as humans, we just have like a portion of like mercy.
Good.
Like, Allah is like perfect in it.
Good. So what we're saying is Allah's names and attributes are unique, without deficiency, without flaw. The names and attributes of creation and created things are deficient and they're flawed, and they're not perfect. Okay? So that separates Allah's names and attributes from the names and attributes of anything else. Okay? So if we understand this, and John turns around and says, God is merciful, my mom is merciful too. So what's he done here?
Getting doubt.
Yeah, so what he's done is he's saying that there is an attribute of God that my mom also shares with God. Right? This is what he's doing, in other words, is he's taking his mom and he's giving his mother an attribute which deifies his mother. Meaning it takes his mother and gives his mother godlike qualities. Right? So we can't do this. And we can't do the opposite either. So no one can turn around and say, oh, you know what? God is as loving as Steve. You can't do this either. Because now what you're doing is you're taking God and you're anthropomorphizing. You're bringing God down to a human level, giving him human characteristics. So we have to separate this completely. What we have to clarify to people is that yes, God has names and attributes. Yes, created things have attributes and names. However, there is no similarity between the two. The only similarity is in what? Just the wording, just language. Because we're limited with the language that we have, that we use.
But I think even in the wording, for instance, the fact that Allah is mentioned before Allah's names is giving it that uniqueness of comprehensiveness.
Absolutely. But, so when we translate into English, we have to clarify that He is the merciful. Your mother may be mercy, but your mother's mercy is Allah's mercy is perfect and complete, but your mother's mercy is not unlike God's mercy in any way, shape, or form. Right? You cannot compare it. God is beyond comparison. Right? So this is something very important we clarify, because especially for Christians fall into this trap as well. Because what would they say? Give me an example of how Christians fall into giving the names and attributes of God to created things.
Jesus.
Jesus, yeah, absolutely. Right? How do atheists fall into this trap? Can someone tell me? You'd be thinking, what do you mean atheist? So some people take the universe as a means of an idol, a big idol in and of itself. Yes, but
Use the word Mother Nature.
Mother Nature, exactly. Yeah. They refer to things like Mother Nature, and they use loose terms like this. So they don't want to. If you push them, they'll always end up giving power, attributing power to created things. Right? And so we need to clarify this for them to each other. So moving on, the last one, understanding Allah's oneness in respects to His worship. So what are we trying to get across here? Absolutely. There's only one being who's worthy of worship. So we should worship God alone. And what's really nice is what you can do is, if you mention this at the end, if you ever get into this discussion, is that because you've made these first 2 points, based on the first two, the third logically follows anyway. If Allah is the only creator, the only maintainer, the only sustainer, the one who has the most perfect names and attributes, He is the only one that has all power, then who should we worship? Why should we worship created things which have no power, have no benefit, etc.? Right? So it's a very nice, intuitive, natural point that people can appreciate, inshallah, as well. So moving on, obviously the opposite of this is shirk. We don't need to go into any details regarding this. Now brothers, before we go on, one of the things that we've added to this course recently is a sort of a self-reflection element too. Because what tends to happen, unfortunately, in the da'wah, and I'm sure some of you have come across this, is when people get involved in the da'wah, they tend to neglect themselves, and it becomes about the other person alone, right? So we need to try to sort of balance this out too, and remind ourselves of, okay, this information, this knowledge that I'm learning, how does this first and foremost impact myself? How should this change me? Right? Now, if we understand Allah's oneness correctly, and we have a clear understanding of Tawheed, and we understand who Allah is, then how should this impact us? Now, there's a few points to consider. Number one, dignity and self-esteem. If you understand Allah is the only creator, the only one worthy of worship, that means you bow down to no one. You submit to no one or nothing else. You worship Allah alone. Right? And this is a very powerful point even for non-Muslims, because we live in a society where people want to be free. Right? One of the things they say, I'm a free person. I don't want to submit. I don't want to follow religion. I don't want to obey God. I do what I want to do. Right? Now this is the sort of people we live amongst. This is the ideology and the mindset of people that we live amongst. Now in such a case, all you have to do is remind them, no, everyone is a slave. No one is free. Every single human being is a slave. You're either a slave to people, systems, ideas, ideologies. If you say you're a slave to none of these things, and you say I do what I want to do, who are you a slave of? Yourself. I do what I want to do, meaning you submit to yourself. You are a slave of yourself. So Islam is the only way of life which truly frees you and liberates you. Because when you submit to Allah, what does that mean? What happens? What are you acknowledging? As soon as you say, I submit to Allah alone, what are you acknowledging? That I've cut myself off the slavery of anything else. And when you do that truly, then and only then are you truly free. Can you always wanted? It's parked outside. It's yours. The keys are posted through the letterbox. How would that feel? Good, yeah? You'd be a bit shocked, yeah? I don't believe this, yeah? But it's there. You go down, you see the keys are there. What are you going to do? Huh?
Take it for a ride.
Take it for a ride, yeah. You're going to enjoy it, right? You're going to get in the car, switch you on, go for a ride. Now imagine you're enjoying it, you spend the whole day driving it around, and then as you're driving and you stop the car, you get another call. And the guy asks you, he says, how was it? You're like, good. You know, it's fun, I enjoyed myself. And he says, you know what? Every day, I'm going to give you another model, a new one. A different car, a different supercar, a different thing, a different mansion, a different house. Right? How would that feel, man?
Suspicious.
Nothing to be suspicious about. 100% guaranteed. Yeah. There's no suspicion. It's done deal. You're going to get a new one every single time. How would that be? And he says, before you start worrying about parking, don't worry. It's covered. I bought you a huge car park. You can park all your cars there. So it'll be amazing, right? It'll be amazing, subhanAllah. Now look, I want you to compare that to something that the Prophet ﷺ said. He said, by Allah, if Allah were to guide one man through you, it would be better for you than the best type of camels, plural. Right? Now I want us to really consider something. There's another narration as well which speaks about it will be better for you than the entire earth and everything on its surface. Right? Now the point that the Prophet ﷺ is trying to get across to us here is that if Allah is to guide one person through you, He makes you the means of guidance to just one person, that will be better for you than anything you can imagine on the surface of this earth. Multiple times those things. Now if we truly believe in what the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, why wouldn't we want to get this forward? Why wouldn't we want to get this forward? This is, whatever the Prophet said is done deal. There is no questioning it. There's no suspicion like the brother said with the phone call. Right? This is done. This is a fact. If we really believe in the words of the Prophet, peace be upon him, why don't we want to go and get that reward? Now, unless we think we can get the reward otherwise. So we need to really keep this in mind, brothers, inshallah. The potential for rewards of giving dawah are immense. We know of other narrations where the Prophet said, you know, if you guide someone to a good action and they engage in that good action, then you will get the reward equal to that without anything being detracted from their reward. Right? Think about this. You guide someone to Islam. Everything they do as a Muslim from that point onwards, you get the rewards of that as well. And it doesn't stop there. Imagine they get married. their partner is a reaver, they teach their partner. And they have kids, and they teach their kids, and their kids teach their kids, and their kids teach their kids, till all the way up to the Day of Judgment. How much potential reward could you be standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Don't you we want to all be in the position where we make it in front of Allah, and we're standing there on the Day of Judgment, and Allah is showing us rewards that we couldn't even imagine, that we never even did. We may never go Hajj in our life. May Allah allow us all to experience this blessing. But imagine, you can't make it in your life. But you're on the Day of Judgment, you see 100,000 Hajj you never made. That's on your scale. That would be such an amazing reward for that. What a blessing, yeah, that would be. Only if we engage in this work sincerely for the sake of Allah. You know, by the way, the context of this particular narration, Ustad Asid, who works with us, he told me, it's very powerful because I think it was at the time of where the Prophet, there was a battle that the Muslims were about to engage in. Now the Prophet, peace be upon him, advised the commander, I don't remember which Sahabi it was, it's not coming to my mind, and he told him, he said, first, he shared this narration at that point with the Sahabi, emphasizing to them, first give them the message. If they accept it, it's better than going to battle. Giving the dawah, this is the higher objective, that people accept Islam and become Muslim and become worshippers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over anything else. So there's a very powerful context to it as well when you think of it historically. Now, one more example I want to share of rewards, and for me this is probably one of the most powerful motivating factors that we find in the Quran for dawah. Yeah? Now in Surah Yasin chapter 36 verses 13 to 27, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shares an amazing story with us. Now, who can remember this story?
Surah Yasin,
Surah Yasin 13 to 27, near the middle end of the surah. There's a story.
It's the man who was carpenter who came to the people. I think there were three prophets.
Yes.
Sahabi-Kariya,
yes.
or-
Yeah, that's the story. It's a very powerful story. So Allah tells us of a community, a nation, where Allah sends two messengers to reach them. Okay. Now I want you to pay attention to something. When you read this story, and maybe do this when you go away today, what you'll realize that there's pieces of information that are omitted. Allah doesn't mention certain pieces of information. And we know whatever Allah gives us in the Quran is perfect. Everything we need, to the letter. There's nothing extra, there's nothing less. Right? Now in this story, Allah tells us He sends to a community. We don't know who the community is. Obviously the Mufassirin have commented on this and given us some historical background. But Allah doesn't mention this. There are two prophets sent to this community. Now the first question that should come to mind is what? Isn't one messenger sufficient for a community? A messenger that's supported by Allah is sufficient, right? Most of the communities and nations received one messenger. Yes, there were occasions where there was one who was accompanied by another, but those were rare occasions. Generally, one messenger was enough. Now here Allah sends two. And then He tells us He sends a third. How many messengers present among this community? Three messengers. Isn't that more than enough? Right? Then, the next thing we hear is of a man who comes rushing in from a part of the town, city. Right? And what does he do? What does he do?
Gives dawah. Yeah.
Okay, if we were
listen to the Prophet.
Yeah, so he gives dawah, but if we were more accurate, would we say he was giving direct dawah, or was he supporting the dawah? He's supporting the dawah, right? Because he's supporting the messages, right? And if there was ever a time in history where someone didn't have to get involved in this work, this was probably it. There's three messages amongst the community already. It was probably a small community, to be honest, because it's only a recent phenomenon that the population of the world has increased so much. Back then, the community, the population of the world was very small. Communities were very small, right? Now he comes and he supports the message. What do they do? When we read the tafsir, what do we find out? What do they do to him?
They beat him to death.
They kill him.
Yeah.
Yeah, essentially they kill him. Then, but in the Quran, Allah does not tell us how they kill him. Allah doesn't even mention the killing. What's the next thing we hear?
The reward.
The reward. When he's on the other side. And what does he say? What does he say? What does this man say? Only if my people knew how Allah has elevated me, honored me. Think about this. We don't know the man's name, right? All we know, we don't know how he was killed. These pieces of information are completely omitted. We don't know what town it was, what city it was. All we know, and what Allah is getting us to focus on, is the guy's action, what he did, and his reward. All he did was he supported the message, or supported the dawah of three messengers present, and in return Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored him in such a way that all he wished for was that his people could see how Allah honored him for this. Think about that. So much so, look at the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increased his favors upon this man. He wanted his community to know Allah already. Allah records his words in the Quran that every single Muslim or non-Muslim, even anyone that reads the Quran till the day of judgment will know how Allah is. Look at the level of honor this man received. Now compare that to our situation today, brothers. How many messengers present amongst us today? How many prophets? None. Any coming? Well, technically Isa is coming, but he's not going to bring anything. Right? He's going to follow the way of the Prophet. Right? So we have no messengers present today. If you give da'wah and not support the da'wah, actually do the work of the Prophet in this time, imagine the reward Allah has potentially in store for you and for us. Can we even begin to imagine? For only sincerely giving da'wah for the sake of Allah. If we could sincerely do this for the sake of Allah, if that man got such a reward, imagine what your reward would be. SubhanAllah. Yeah, we can't even begin to imagine. How much potential reward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in store for those that engage in this work. And I think that's sufficient. What we'll do is we'll move on now till Dhuhr. We're going to look at the characteristics of dua. Now, like I said, for me, this is probably one of the most important parts of the course. If we can get this right, everything else falls in. With everyone else, that really helps with you in your sincerity whenever you're about to do an action. Practical tips I'm talking about. So what do you do yourself? Can anyone? Yeah, so some of the scholars even were quite harsh in the way they put it. They would say, just consider your public deeds as wiped. Yeah? Don't even consider that you're going to get rewarded for it. Obviously, this is a harsh way of looking at it, but if it helps putting things in perspective, as an exercise you can do it. But the point they were getting across was, if you're doing public deeds, at least do as much private deeds, just to train your soul, train your heart, and just to make sure that your rewards are protected, at least from that perspective. Right? Yes, brother.
Remember your own sins, to humble yourself until you commit it, and the first three people are going to be judged and going to hellfire.
Yeah, so remind yourself of your sins and how pathetic you are as a person, if you really think about it. Yes.
I think for me to be sincere, you just have to remember that everybody's same as you really. Like, they're all human, so they've got heart, they've got feelings, so you have to think before you speak. So you have to with anybody, no matter who they are.
So humble yourself. Basically. Remind yourself you're nothing special. You're just like everyone else. Basically. Yes,
one thing that works for me that could maybe help brothers, inshallah, and this is what I learned from other scholars and ulama, is in terms of dawah, I look at the implications of that. So for example, let's say if we're doing street dawah, I want to go to chat to this person. If Allah guides this person, I get the reward. If I get the reward, inshallah, I'll be saved from the punishment of the grave. Inshallah, I'll be saved from the fire. Inshallah, I get in Jannah. So I do it step by step. What's the implication of this? What's the implication? So I kind of envision the whole thing, the whole process. That kind of keeps the whole thing in process and implications. So in terms of that.
Doctor.
I always say to myself that it's only the mercy of Allah that I'm doing it, not just because I want to do it. I think that's to keep in mind.
Yes, brother.
So to add something, when you say do good deeds in private, right? That's for yourself, of course, yeah. But when you do good deeds in public, if you renew your intention, that good deed could work as a form of dawah as well. You know what I mean? So good deeds should really always kept hidden. If you do it publicly with the right intention,
yes,
then it can be resulting in a form of dawah as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yes, just to clarify.
I know some brothers that come to Rotherham down in South Yorkshire from West Yorkshire. They come down with some aid for others, yeah. Obviously, it's not really for showing off, but the intention is to help people.
Yeah.
But if that is made public, that can work as a form of dawah.
Yeah, sometimes doing
absolutely. Good deeds.
Sometimes doing something deliberately publicly with the right intention is a good deed in itself. So you may, for example, some of the companions will go and pray tahajjud in the masjid deliberately, just so that other people could see and be motivated and inspired to do the same, to worship Allah more. So the intention behind it is key, subhanAllah. Yes.
Making sure that, for instance, your dawah is accordance with the sunnah, and and in line with taqwa as well. So meaning, for instance, if you're giving street dawah and you have a female, and for instance she comes dressed inappropriately, don't stare at certain parts of her body. Maybe keep your gaze down and give dawah appropriately. And maybe things like istighfar and any other dhikr that help you keep in check.
Anyone else?
Try tonight.
lead by example, so always look inwardly and understand what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong before you outwardly approach somebody.
Yeah.
So that's what I try to do. Is if I see something is wrong, sometimes I don't have the need to speak out.
Yeah.
I try leading by example. They're strong man.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Guys, the points you made are brilliant. At the end of the day, it's like, unfortunately, what happens in many cases, we don't even make an intention these days, whether good or bad. We just do things without even thinking about it, sitting and deliberately thinking about attention, right? So, very important, I guess, to just sit there and really talk yourself through the whole process of what you're about to engage in. Another very powerful thing, or two things that I felt of benefit was, number one, to memorize one of the du'as that the Prophet, peace be upon him, taught to protect you from shirk. Right? And always repeat that, because the Prophet, peace be upon him, taught those du'as to protect us. Right? And especially when you're involved in public activity and work, which Dawah is, even if it's small scale or large scale, it's always public. Make that. Bradford alone, what's the Muslim population?
140,000.
140,000. Out of the 140,000 Muslims today, 2019, on this Saturday morning, a bunch of maybe 30, 35, 40 brothers have been chosen by Allah to sit here and go through something by which they can now convey the message of Islam. Look at the way Allah's favored every single one. That's the fact. You know, there is the reality we tell ourselves, so like we probably have been telling ourselves up until this point, which is, I woke up this morning. Can you not just pray all of your prayers at one time at the end of the day? Why do you need to take an extended lunch break on Friday? This goes on until the break is over, and all you have done is answer his question upon question. What's the problem with this scenario other than Kash? I think he knows the answer. What's the issue with this scenario? So the issue is, John's come to you, he's asked you a question, you've answered it. He asked you another question, you answer it. He asked you a third question, you answer it. You keep answering questions and the break is over. From a Dawah perspective, what's the problem here?
I think we might end up in answering a lot of questions. So maybe I think you can say, perhaps we need to get together when we've got time on a cup of coffee or tea. So let me explain to you what Islam is.
Okay.
The basic.
So good. So what's the problem you're outlining?
There's no education, not breaking it down.
Well, there is education because you're telling him answers.
Like if it's like just one-worded answers, you're
Yeah.
not really breaking it down for him or educating him in that sense.
Okay, so what you're not educating him about from a Dawah perspective? Yes.
You're not actually really inviting him to Islam, you're not giving him
Exactly.
the monotheism.
Exactly. You can answer 100 questions about more not specific issues, general issues about Islam which are not relevant to him at that point. Hence, you're not giving him effective Dawah. If he doesn't know who Allah is, if he leaves the conversation without knowing who Allah is, who the Prophet peace be upon him was, what the purpose of life is, have you given him Dawah? No. Right? You just answer some questions about Islam. Right? So this, we're going to look at how to answer this, or the correct way of doing this after the break. So we'll break for Salah now, and we'll continue after the break.